Spinal roots. You see, they join up the ventral and the dorsal. Each of these rootlets is going to have motor and sensory functions. Now, the spinal roots service mostly everything below the neck. But what about the head and face? These are serviced by the cranial nerves. Now, the cranial nerves, rather than coming off the spinal cord, you see they're coming right off the base of the brain. So these cranial nerves do function much like spinal nerves, but again, they service the head and they emanate right from the brain. That's why they're called cranial nerves and not spinal nerves. Now, while each of the spinal nerves had both a motor and a sensory function, some of the cranial nerves will only have sensory functions and some will only have motor functions. Others will have sensory and motor functions. Now, when it comes to the cranial nerves, you have to learn the number and the name, and of course, the function. Some people might just say the fifth cranial nerve, other people will say the trigeminal, and you have to know that they're talking about the same thing. All right, let's go through these one at a time. Oh, and the numbering of these, by the way, is anterior to posterior. And that's going to cause a little bit of an awkward hiccup when we think about the cranial nerves via function. Okay, so don't let that confuse you. All right, the first cranial nerve is the olfactory bulb. Smell, purely sensory. Blue lines going into the brain indicate sensory. Red lines coming out of the brain indicate motor. The optic nerve is the second cranial nerve. Now, 3, 4, and 6 control movement of the eyes. Up, down, left, right, and accommodation. How can I indicate this? Uh, where the eyes can get closer or further apart, helping with binocular vision and distance perception. So it's the oculomotor, the trochlear, and the abducens. All control eye movement. Now the fifth cranial nerve is a big one, huge, and functionally very important. Sensory wise, you see it's providing sensation to the entire face. Oops. There are 3 subdivisions of the trigeminal. It doesn't matter for this class, but they cover different parts of your face. This is the dentist nerve. When a dentist has to work on your teeth, if he has to work on your lower jaw, he'll put the needle right here. Because your lower jaw muscle is, your lower jaw bone is so dense, if you put the medicine here, it would never penetrate and reach the nerve. So they go way back here in the corner of your mouth. If you ever had it, it hurts. But he delivers the drug and it knocks out your entire one side lower jaw. Your upper jawbone is much weaker, so if he's working on a tooth there, she's liable to inject the medicine right next to the tooth. Motor function. This is uh, your jaw muscle, your muscle of mastication, chewing. Very powerful muscle. The trigeminal is also known for trigeminal neuralgia. I won't write that part, I'll just write neuralgia. This is nerve pain. Often it can be sourced to compression of one or more rootlets of the trigeminal nerve. Blood vessel can strangulate it, causing excruciating pain in the face. High suicide rate for this pain condition because even morphine doesn't really help. Okay, seventh is a facial nerve. Motor function to all of the muscles of the face. So facial expressions, okay, very important. And this also provides coverage of the tongue for the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Now, the seventh cranial nerve is very delicate and it is prone to getting inflamed, which causes Bell's, I think it's two L's, yeah, Bell's palsy, which is almost always one sided and it is characterized by one-sided facial droop. And this is not a stroke. This is due to uh, inflammation of the facial nerve, which causes paralysis of half the face. It's almost always temporary, and some of you might even know someone who had it. The auditory, sometimes called the vestibular, processes hearing, brings in hearing, and balance. You all know by now that the inner ear, which of course processes hearing, also processes balance through the semicircular canals that are liquid filled. I can't draw them because they're a very cool three-dimensional shape, but you can look them up. And the liquid in there provides constant feedback, particularly to cerebellum and to the somatosensory cortex about where you are in space. And then the motor cortex can be engaged to correct any problems with the balance. The glossopharyngeal motor controls muscles of the throat and larynx, right? Critical for speech. And the posterior third of taste of your tongue. The vagus nerve is strange. It's the only one that doesn't service the head, goes down and services the viscera, and is providing communication between your visceral state and your brain. Now, mostly this is an inhibitory input here. The motor input is mostly relaxing. Your neck muscles are controlled by the spinal accessory nerve. And finally, last but definitely not least, the hypoglossal, which is critical for tongue movement, which is critical for eating and language. So there we have the 12 cranial nerves.